Okay, so today we're going to be talking about the planets in astrology, and we're going to be starting with the planet Mercury. Um, the house and sign placement of Mercury in a birth chart normally represents how we learn and what ignites our curiosity. It's associated with logical thinking, communication, intellect, and awareness. So I don't know if you want to give us more of a description, Kevin.
Yeah, I mean, so Mercury is indicates primarily how we think and communicate. So it rules Gemini as well as Virgo. It's also exalted in Virgo. And then it would be in fall and detriment in Pisces. It would also be in detriment in the sign of Sagittarius.
And Kevin, can you, oh, sorry to interrupt you, Kevin, but can you just
Sure.
explain what those terms mean?
Those terms in astrology would be considered terms, each planet is considered either dignified or in detriment or debilitated in different signs. And so when a planet is in one of those signs, it will have a more distinct expression. Either it will be it will be an indication of some form of challenge, or it'll be an indication of some sort of a gift. When we do the video on aspects, you could look at hard aspects as another indication of a challenge, and harmonious aspects as an indication of some sort of a gift. So I have found that information to be relevant, and so we're going to present that here. It's just a significant piece of information to be aware of, and almost everybody has planets that are either in debility or dignity, and everybody has planets that are challenged in one way or another. I've never seen a chart that didn't have any sort of challenges, so it's not necessarily a bad thing. Indication. It just indicates where we may have some work to do.
Okay. And, I would really encourage people, the other topic that comes up commonly with the planet Mercury is Mercury retrograde. And we have a video talking about Mercury retrograde, what that means if you do see the little R in your chart. So I'd encourage people to watch that video. And also we have a video on the third house, and the third house is ruled by Mercury and the sign of Gemini. Is there anything else, Kevin, that you would really want people to think about specifically when they're looking at Mercury in their birth chart?
Yeah, Mercury will give us an indication of like what we're interested in. One of the things that I'd like to present in this video that is a different perspective that I have is that each planet carries a particular quality of emotion with it. So very often in astrology, the moon is described as the ruler of emotions, and I don't think most astrologers believe this, but it's kind of presented in such a way as like all of your emotions are described by the moon, and none of the other planets or the sun have any sort of impact on describing your emotions, which couldn't be further from the truth. So one of the things I'm going to add in this video is the particular quality of emotion that each planet will stimulate. And Mercury, interestingly, I would say, is the one planet that really is not really good. It's considered like antithetical to emotion. However, what I would describe as an emotion is curiosity and interest. And Mercury very often, as far as I understand, Mercury will indicate what we get curious about, what we're interested in learning about, what grabs our attention, which will very often indicate our preferences as well as like form our beliefs and our attitudes.
Okay, so the next planet is the planet Venus, which is thought of as the planet of love. I've also heard it described as being the planet of love and money. I'm not sure if you'd agree with that. It's thought of as being all about pleasure, love, romance, and harmony, and our emotional attachments. Marriages, friendships, and other unions, could even be business partnerships. So I don't know if you could give us your your interpretation of Venus?
Yeah, so I would say definitely relationships and love, and romance. Venus will show us what we find beautiful. So that energy of love and beauty kind of go together. And I would say that's really kind of, to me, captures the essence of Venus. I have not found any indication that Venus indicates our relationship to money, though it may, and maybe I just haven't seen it. But my experience does not corroborate that. So I think where that came from is that Venus rules Taurus, and Taurus is considered the sign of money. So a lot of times these descriptions come from the sign that the planet rules. So a lot of astrologers have basically just kind of copy and pasted. So they take the description of Taurus and they say everything that describes Taurus describes Venus, which I do not believe to be the truth. So Venus rules Taurus as well as Libra. It's also exalted in Taurus, and exalted in Pisces. So then it would be in its fall in Virgo. It would be in its fall and detriment in Scorpio, and it would be in detriment in Aries. What I find with Venus is I would call Venus the female archetype of the human ego. It's where Mars would be its counterpart, the male archetype. And so what I mean by that is it very much represents like those like all feminine principles. The moon does as well, though I would say the moon is more of like a core energy. It's a bigger energy. It's more primary. Venus, I would say, is more like how a female or somebody who identifies as female would express their feminine qualities. And then for somebody who is attracted to females, it would show what they're attracted to in a female. I've also found that very often, particularly for heterosexual women, that Venus will indicate their female friends. Very often, transits to or progressions from Venus in the chart, in a person's birth chart, will like very often correspond to some sort of an event with another female in their life, whether that be a romantic partner or a friend, or perhaps just meeting somebody new that ends up being significant in your life. Like I said, Venus will show us what we love and what we find beauty in. And so very often what we love and find beauty in will also help us to define what we value. So that's something that I also think is very much part of Venus, is like what's important to us.
So how would you, when people, say you're looking at where your Venus placement in your birth chart, would you say that is where people are most likely to find kind of this feeling of love and joy and in their life?
Yeah. So yes, what I would say, two pieces to that. The sign and house that your Venus happens to be in, so me being a man attracted to females, the type of women that I find myself attracted to and in relationship to have prominent Aquarius and Scorpio like qualities. My Venus is in Aquarius in the 8th house. So the women in my life end up having the Aquarius and Scorpio energy prominent, and stimulate those types of experiences that would correspond to the 8th and the 11th houses. So I also find myself interacting with women in that type of environment that would be described by 8th and 11th houses. So I'm into like healing and shamanic communities and activities and what could be considered, I don't know, occult or metaphysical, things like that, which would be kind of eighth house, the things of healing type work. So somebody who's say has their Venus in their third house may find women with Gemini-like qualities, whether it's as a friend or a romantic partner. And they may be attracted to those types of women, whether it be as a friend or a romantic partner. They may also find that they meet women in that type of environment that would be described by the third house, which, I find third house stuff could be more superficial interactions, like an environment where you kind of meet a lot of people, superficially. It could also describe a sibling or a neighbor is a third house. Those are also third house topics.
Okay, so we're going to be talking about Mars, which is, I think, probably one of the planets that people understand the most, just in general astrology. It's thought of as the planet of passion and war. Mars is the action planet. Sitting on the sidelines belongs somewhere else in the heavens. Simply put, Mars speaks to the power and confident expression of the individual. So again, that the sign and house placement of Mars in the birth chart represents our drive, ambition, passion, and energy. So I don't know if you want to add to that, or if you disagree with any of it, please.
I would agree with that. I would say Mars shows how we take action to go after what we want. It also shows what causes us to get angry. So anger would be the primary emotion with Mars, as well as perhaps like drive. There's a number of emotions. I would say Mars is a somewhat emotional planet. Passion, anger, motivation, aggressiveness, or lack thereof. So yeah, Mars shows how we go after what we want. It shows what we get angry, what causes us to get angry. And what's really interesting about that one is the sign and house that Mars happens to be in very often will very literally indicate what makes you angry. So perhaps say you have Mars in the fourth house, perhaps your parents piss you off. Mars in the fifth house, maybe your kid makes you mad. Mars in the 10th house, maybe your boss or a coworker makes you mad, or perhaps in the sixth house, the same could be said. So Mars would also then indicate like the male archetype. So for those people who are attracted to men, Mars will indicate the type of man that you would be attracted to. For those who are attracted to women, Mars may indicate the type of man that you happen to find in your life. It won't be exclusively that, but as with Venus, though, you may see a theme of particular type of male that shows up in your life as indicated by the sign in the house that your Mars falls in.
And the one thing I wanted to add is I think how many athletes, Olympic athletes or, people that make it to professional sports have a prominent Mars in their chart, because that really, you need that real drive to actually reach certain levels of athletic competition. And I think that's something that just is very associated with Mars.
My understanding is there actually has been a great deal of research done with that. There's somebody by the name of, I believe it was Michael Gaquilin, something. I don't know if I'm saying his name right, but the guy basically was like took a scientific approach to astrology and looked at something like 30,000 charts. He found that athletes tend, a large percentage of athletes had Mars at their midheaven. And to where like a large percentage of, I think it was scientists had Saturn at the midheaven, and basically went through like the different professions and found like different planets at the midheaven. And he did a lot more than that. I haven't really gone into depth with his research, but there has been research done on that. So to answer that question, yes, athletes typically do have Mars prominent. And so then Mars would also then carry the energy of that, like your physical vitality. When Mars is challenged in your chart, either by being in a sign of debility and or being in a hard aspect, particularly to certain planets, such as Saturn or Neptune, that person very often will have low energy, low drive, perhaps some sort of physical limitations or difficulties, health issues, perhaps. Perhaps also like depression is another one that kind of comes with that, because when we lack that physical energy, very often it will manifest as depression or addiction.
And can you talk a little bit about, I guess, the signs?
Yeah, so Mars rules Aries and then would be in detriment in Libra, and it's exalted in Capricorn and in fall in Cancer.
Okay, so the next planet we're going to talk about is Jupiter. I think this is the planet everybody wants to look at in their chart because it's associated with luck, and really more than, maybe luck isn't a good word to associate with Jupiter, maybe more its expansion. I think the idea of Jupiter is growth, expansion, but it can be prosperity and good fortune. But it's associated also with, I don't know if you'd agree with this, but an urge for freedom, exploration, and travel. And I think in the general astrology cookbooks, the house and sign placement of your Jupiter in your birth chart is the area of life where you're granted gifts and blessings. But I'm hoping you can explain that.
Yeah,
more.
So that's the traditional explanation of astrology, which I would say, from what I can tell, is still the consensus amongst astrologers. Traditional astrology really made Jupiter out to be the grand benefic, like the Santa Claus, and then Saturn was like the devil, the big malefic, right? So Jupiter was all good and Saturn was all bad, and they're counterparts, they're opposites. I find that couldn't be further from the truth. Jupiter as well as Saturn have both good and bad qualities, as does every planet. So Jupiter, being known as the planet of luck, is definitely, as well as everything you described, that's very much the common classic description. I would say I don't necessarily disagree with any of that. What I would describe Jupiter as far as I understand what I've seen, and like I said, Jupiter is as much of a troublemaker as any other planet, as far as I've seen, at least excluding the outer three planets. I would say the outer three planets are more inclined to cause trouble than the rest of them. We'll get into why when we get to those planets. Jupiter seems to accelerate and expand, whatever it is. So it's like things speed up and increase, which can be a wonderful thing if it's something you want. If it's something you don't want, that might not be so good. So the sign and house that Jupiter falls in may show where you can find perhaps good luck and expansion, perhaps also your optimism, your meaning in life. A topic that is very much, I would say, as much a part of Jupiter's archetype that does get talked about, but not as much, is this is like, it's the energy of the philosopher, where you find meaning in life. So Jupiter, being the ruler, so Jupiter rules Sagittarius, which would be the opposite of Gemini. So if you think of Gemini likes to learn a little bit about a lot of things, kind of scan, the surface and kind of get all over the place, Jupiter wants to go in depth into like a big, meaningful topic. Very often it's of a philosophical or religious nature, though not always. And it's maybe less interested in trivial things. So travel is also very much part of Jupiter's archetype. It's that energy of wanting to explore and to be free, and to have fun. So Jupiter is also the former ruler of Pisces, though I give Pisces rulership to Neptune. The Neptune energy is much more like Pisces, in my opinion. Jupiter would also be considered exalted in Cancer, so in fall in Capricorn, and then it would be in detriment in Gemini. So you could say it's in dignity. I think that's kind of more what's commonly said is Jupiter would be dignified in Pisces and in debility in Virgo. So it's kind of this more general term. It's, maybe rules Pisces, maybe it's just exalted there, or kind of somewhere in between. So the dark side of Jupiter that people don't really talk about is like carelessness, recklessness, tactlessness. I find people who have like a prominent Jupiter Sagittarius energy are inclined to just blurt things out. They could be preachy very often, kind of know-it-all type stuff. Careless, irresponsible, flakiness. It's that free spirit, right? Responsibility is not of any concern to Jupiter. It's the energy of fun and freedom. So, this is where that kind of balance between Saturn and Jupiter comes in. Because if you have all Jupiter and no Saturn, you're probably not going to be very thoughtful or responsible or reliable, things like that. So that would also then perhaps show up when Jupiter has hard aspects, like say, it's like square to the sun or something like that. You may see a pattern like being irresponsible and flaky or preachy, kind of belligerent, even something like that.
And I think a good example, when you were talking about this idea that, Jupiter might not always be about luck and good things when we talk about expansion. I know when we did that video on Saturn and the Pluto conjunction, Jupiter was also in the mix in the beginning of January 2020. Yeah. So we did one video on the Pluto-Saturn conjunction and oppositions, and we talked about 9/11, and then we also talked about the beginning of the pandemic in January 2020. And I think probably Jupiter did play a big part in why that was such a big transit. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting with the pandemic and everything. People talk about the Saturn-Pluto cycle, but Jupiter was also there as well. And, certainly Jupiter having that energy of accelerating and expanding things, but also perhaps bringing this element of kind of like philosophical, so if you think about like the authorities kind of, or, certain people kind of getting on their high horse about, what you should be doing, it's this whole experience with pandemic has been very polarized, with both sides saying we're right and you're wrong, and this is why you should be doing what I say you should be doing and not what you believe is right. That's very much like a kind of twisted Jupiter type behavior.
Okay, so the next planet we're going to talk about is Saturn. I remember when I was a kid, this was my favorite planet. But I know, like you said, with astrology, I just loved it because it had the rings around it from an astronomy perspective. But, in astrology, this Saturn is associated with the planet of work and maybe lessons. Saturn is I don't necessarily like this word, and I know you don't either, but Saturn is the planet of karma and life lessons. Saturn rewards hard work and maturity throughout your life. Saturn will push you to learn lessons to do the hard work. So I think that karma word is not the word.
I would say every planet indicates karma equally, in my opinion, though I've heard that from many places as well. That's another traditional description. So Saturn traditionally is the big malefic. Interestingly, Saturn and Satan sound very similar, and from what I understand, that is not by accident. That a long time ago, whenever the term Satan was created, I I believe there was a correlation to Saturn. So Saturn was perceived as like the devil. And so part of that archetype then would be, when Saturn is active, so wherever Saturn is in your chart, the sign or house or planet that's aspecting it is going to be challenged. It's going to have hardship brought onto it. So, like in medical astrology, then there, you would say the part of the body that corresponds to the sign that your Saturn is in is also then perhaps going to be weakened. I haven't found that to be true. I would say my part of the body that my Saturn happens to be in seems to be just fine. I would say yours is as well. So being the opposite of Jupiter, Saturn slows things down. It contains things. And so when you're living from the ego, you want to just get what you want right away. You don't want to have to work for it. So anything that Saturn is interacting with, what I find really, it just slows things down. And so people take that as like bad luck. What I would say is anything that Saturn is in aspect to, or the sign and house that it happens to be in, things will unfold in time. Like for me, Saturn's in my 5th house. I had my first child when I was 38 years old, which, is not young. It's not old, but it was something that came a little later in life than maybe it would for some other people, slightly older, though these days, maybe not as much as it would have been in the past. So yeah, typically when Saturn is in play, you have to work for it, whatever it is that it may be, would be indicated by, the sign in the house. Saturn is also the archetype of, if you think of Jupiter as like the free spirited, kind of party animal, fun loving, adventurer kind of thing. Saturn would be the archetype of somebody who goes to work, who takes life seriously, who takes their responsibilities very seriously, is not interested in playing and having fun because it's very focused on fulfilling whatever its duties may be. So if Jupiter kind of brings that kind of fun, joyful energy, which certainly in America, we, in my opinion, overvalue, it's like, why aren't you smiling? Why aren't you acting happy? Well, it's like, nobody's happy all the time. And those people who seem like they are, perhaps have a prominent Jupiter, but, it's not necessarily an authentic expression of how they are all the time. So yeah, Saturn tends to carry a little more of a serious demeanor. It may be inclined to err towards pessimism. It perhaps could bring about a bit of a kind of a mopiness and kind of like that Eeyore type quality, depending on how it's configured. But yeah, it calls us to be disciplined. So whatever it is, it's not necessarily you're working hard, you're working consistently. You just work every day or, throughout time, and things will unfold gradually to where that Jupiter energy, touches it and it things happen. And when Jupiter has that effect, it doesn't necessarily go well in the long run. It may be enjoyed in the period of time where that thing is unfolding and expanding really quickly, but it's not necessarily going to be for the best. So, that's part of the Saturn dynamic is there's going to be setbacks. Things aren't necessarily going to work out the way you want them to, and you got to find a way. You got to keep going. And so then Saturn will definitely bring bad things because a lot of people tend to give up. So part of that energy is to have your setbacks, to have things not work out the way you want them to, and to continue to move forward.
And, Saturn is ruled by the sign of Capricorn. And one of the things, again, in kind of more cookbook pop astrology that I think Saturn is associated with is the father energy. So I know a lot of times in kind of cookbook astrology, if you have, Sun square Saturn or something like that, it would be traditionally maybe interpreted that maybe you had a difficult childhood with your father, or you had a very...
But your father's a jerk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Basically very authoritative, or,
And if your moon squares Saturn, then your mom's a jerk. Yeah. Which may be the case, though it may not be. It definitely does play out that way sometimes. So I didn't go into the planets that, so Saturn rules Capricorn. It would be in detriment in Cancer. It's exalted in Libra and in fall in Aries, and it's dignified, formally ruler of Aquarius. Then it would be in debility in Leo.
And do you think we could just talk a little bit about the Saturn return, even though I know we're not going over?
Yeah, and I think we should do a whole other video on that, but I'll touch on it briefly. So okay. Saturn's orbit is roughly 30 years. It could be anywhere from 28 to 31 years, depending on where it was in its retrograde portion when you were born. So if you think about everything I just said about Saturn, you can look at that first Saturn return when you're roughly 30 years old as the beginning of adulthood. And in my opinion, even in your late 20s, certainly mid 20s, but even late 20s, you're still not fully mature. I would say you're really not even fully mature till you're more like in your mid 40s, which I'm not there. And being a Capricorn and having a prominent Saturn Capricorn energy, I value maturity and kind of growth over time. And I can see where I still have a lot of room to grow. So you could say that really probably doesn't even then complete itself till your second Saturn return, which would be when you're roughly 60. At that point, you would be kind of like an elder, so to speak. So that first Saturn return would be like the beginning of your adulthood. The second Saturn cycle would be like your life as your career, perhaps raising children. And then the completion of that would then be the completion of your career, though, of course, people's careers can complete at any time. So very often people work well past their Saturn return. Some people will retire before that, but it's kind of that completion of that time period of when you're really kind of like working hard, so to speak. And then that third Saturn cycle, now you're the elder, you're the advisor. For those who are young, you have time to kind of reflect on things. And hopefully by that point in your life, you've developed some wisdom, which you can share with those younger than you.
And, when we say the term return, what that means is that Saturn is returning to the same place as it was in your natal chart. Is that a correct definition?
Yeah, it's completed one orbit around the sun, in which case, yes, it would be returning to the point where it was in your chart. So for me, I was born with Saturn at the end of Scorpio. So then my Saturn return would be when Saturn transits through the end of Scorpio and crosses the degree in which it was when I was born.
So Uranus is thought of as the planet of sudden change. It's also associated with, I don't know if you'd agree with this, but the planet of genius, unexpected. Astrological interpretations associate Uranus with unconventional ideas, individuality, discoveries, electricity, inventions, revolution. It has that kind of like, it's almost like a lightning bolt energy. And I think I think Uranus is probably, it's hard to predict. It is this unpredictable energy.
So I agree with all of that. Uranus rules the sign of Aquarius. So then it would be in detriment in Leo. The outer planets, I think Uranus is considered exalted in Scorpio and in detriment in Taurus. However, Pluto still doesn't have an official sign of exaltation. And I think Neptune is debatable. So I would say even Uranus's sign of exaltation is still perhaps debatable, though. It's now been over 250 years since it's been discovered. So there has been more time for observation. Before I even get into Uranus, I would like to do a quick little something to say about the outer three planets. So Saturn's orbit is roughly 30 years. Uranus's orbit is 84 years. Neptune is 165, I think, and Pluto is something like 240 or 250 years or something like that. So we've now, like, distance-wise, gotten way further from the sun. Orbit-wise, Uranus will make one orbit over the course of an average person's lifetime, to where Neptune and Pluto will maybe make half or a third of an orbit over the course of an average person's lifetime. The outer three planets, as I understand them, are antithetical to the ego and conventional way of living. They create the impulse to transcend and evolve from where we've been. So in general, whether it's in the birth chart or in transit, they tend to be the biggest troublemakers. In my opinion, bigger troublemaker than Saturn or Mars or anything else. And the reason for that is they are all unconventional in their own way. They're all completely unconcerned with the desires and aversions of the ego. They move us to evolve and kind of connect with spirit and to become greater than what we've been in the past. And they have the outer three planets have their own way of doing it. And from what I've observed, it's by any means necessary. So very often, where any of the outer three planets show up in the birth chart can, not necessarily, but sometimes do indicate trauma or some sort of a deep wound. And then in transit, very often will bring about some sort of upheaval, some sort of significant, very often unpleasant events, or not necessarily an event, but like a period of time that's very difficult and stressful. So as far as Uranus, I agree with everything you said to describe it. If you think about what I said about the Aquarius energy, Uranus is that, but in a more potent way. So the energy of Uranus, like intuitively, when I feel into it and when I connect with it, as in my own life, as well as when I'm doing a reading for other people, it's very unstable energy. In fact, I would say all three of the outer planets are unstable. So Uranus has this kind of erratic, like nervous quality. The energy is that of a revolutionary kind of, but maybe more like the rebel might be more appropriate. It does what it wants, and it doesn't like rules. It doesn't like convention. So wherever Uranus shows up in a person's birth chart will show where maybe your life has some sort of an erratic quality to it, particularly the house. The house that any of the outer three planets shows up in, according to many astrologers, and I tend to agree with it, is more significant than the sign. The reason being, it can show up in any of the 12 houses where everybody who's born in your generation will have Uranus in the same sign. So there's less like variance regarding the signs that the outer planet happens to show up in. So yeah, Uranus will show where your life, the house that Uranus shows up in will show where your life may have an erratic quality, may be prone to sudden change. It may show where you have some sort of like different way of doing things, kind of outside of the box thinking. If Uranus is prominently aspecting a person's sun, they may like present as unconventional. If it's aspecting a person's Mercury, they may think and communicate in ways that are unconventional. If it's aspecting someone's moon, they may be somewhat erratic or unconventional in the home.
So would you say, as far as when people are looking at Uranus in their chart, I mean, would you agree with the statement, like if you have Uranus in the fifth house in Leo, which I think Leo rules the fifth house, maybe you'd have an unusual way of parenting if you had children, if you had your
or
own.
maybe your child would be unusual. Yeah, either or both.
Okay.
Or yeah, perhaps even like having children will stimulate or activate your like unconventionality or eccentricities.
Yeah, I always think of this is, I guess, a current topic, but I think whenever I think of that Uranus energy, it's like that, like Elon Musk of, hey, I've got a new way of doing things and I'm going to do it my way, whether that's conventional or, I think that. And the other thing I would really kind of like, I always associate when thinking of Uranus, because I do remember there was some kind of Uranus transit, and then there was a volcanic eruption in Hawaii. And I just remember it was kind of like a very classic Uranus thing. But I always think of that idea of it being like a volcano, because it's like, at some point it's going to erupt, but you don't know exactly when, and nobody can really predict, even though we can all try to predict.
So yes, it very often when things like that happen, whether it's in the world or in a person's life, there's a Uranus transit that's active. However, every time there's a Uranus transit doesn't mean something like that's going to happen. What I've found to be the case is there's an energy of kind of feeling unsettled, unstable. And what's interesting looking at like planetary cycles, the Uranus midway point or the halfway point of its orbit is going to be when you're roughly like in your early 40s, somewhere between the age 40 and 45. Which is very often, what you think of as like the midlife crisis, when people quit their job, leave their family, and do something that's kind of like, they did what? You know what I mean? Like you're quitting your job. Like, what the hell? Like, what's wrong with you? Kind of thing. And so it carries that energy of like I'm done. And especially if somebody's like not true to their heart, not true to their soul, when that Uranus transit comes through, a person's like this is it. I'm done. I'm out of here. So you see people like quitting the job and leaving the family because maybe they didn't want to have a family, or maybe they didn't want to work at that job in the first place, and they sucked it up. And then that Uranus midpoint, halfway point comes, and perhaps Uranus, I suspect the people who do that have Uranus prominent in their chart to begin with. Perhaps Uranus is like opposite their sun. So, the Uranus is also then transiting in conjunction to their sun and making an opposition to itself. And then they say, screw it, I'm out of here. I don't care. And that's very much the Uranus kind of energy. Yeah. And, the other part of Uranus is it tends to be adverse to emotion. So it's a very cerebral energy. It does not like emotional like exchanges. What's interesting, though, is it can be very emotional itself. So people with prominent Uranus, or maybe when they're getting a transit from Uranus, may be inclined to like have like meltdowns or be temperamental, and kind of like be inclined to like lash out at other people. But then if you get emotional with them, they're just like, oh, leave me alone. I don't want to deal with this.
So the next planet is Neptune. It's associated with mysticism and perhaps compassion. It's another what we would associate as a generational planet. It takes about 165 years to orbit the sun. So anyone in the same generation is going to have the same sign placement of Neptune, similar to Uranus. And I think it's fluid, changeable, illusionary in nature. It's associated with, I guess, dreams, again, that word illusion, abstract thought, anything mysterious is ruled by Neptune's. So the house and sign placement of Neptune, especially the house placement more than the sign in your birth chart, is spirituality and dreams. I don't know if you'd agree with all of that.
Yeah, Neptune is perhaps the most difficult to describe. What's interesting is when Neptune is making a transit, I find my clients can't tell me, or I'll ask them like, what was happening in this period of your life? Neptune transit is going to last a few years because it's so slow moving. And people typically don't remember. Then if I keep asking, I ask the right questions, they'll be like, Oh yeah, I guess I drank more than I normally do in those few years, or I watched more TV, or I was kind of depressed or something like that. Um, so Neptune rules Pisces. So everything I said about the Pisces 12th house video would apply to Neptune. So then it would be in detriment in Virgo. I believe Neptune is considered exalted in Cancer and in fall in Capricorn. Intuitively, I feel like Neptune may also be exalted in Libra and in fall in Aries. So we'll see. Last time Neptune transited into Aries was the beginning of the Civil War. And so now in a few years, we'll see what happens. So Neptune is the energy of like the mystic, the artist, the musician, the empath. So it is pure feeling, pure emotion. And so being that it feels so much, it carries this sadness, this pain with it. It also would be create the impulse to sacrifice, as well as to glamorize or idealize things. So Neptune rules the imagination. It promotes like dreaming and like daydreaming. And so Neptune will also sometimes show us like what we're inclined to daydream and fantasize about, which is also what we would be inclined to idealize and glamorize. So the house that Neptune happens to show up in will very often show us where we make sacrifices in our life. Particularly if it's negatively aspected, it may show where some sort of a martyr complex shows up. It may also show where we're inclined to fantasize and glamorize something. The Neptune energy is very subtle. So it creates the impulse to transcend humanity. If you could say Uranus would create the impulse to transcend through innovation and rebellion and innovation through the intellect, Neptune would create the impulse to transcend through sacrifice, as well as through, you could say, like dissipation. That's maybe not a great word, but Neptune is also very like a nebulous kind of energy. It's difficult to describe. So it seeks to merge with something that's much greater than itself. So it's, in my opinion, along with all three of the outer planets are difficult in their own way. The Neptune energy really does not like this state of individuality and materialism. It wants to merge with the divine, with the earth, with humanity, with a crowd. So very often, you think of like the like crowd psychology, like say at a sporting event. People who might be very mild mannered are get really enthusiastic, perhaps in a very dysfunctional way. At a sporting event, when everybody gets riled up, they're screaming at the ref and ready to get in a fight with, the fans for the other team. So that it's that Neptune energy that very much will cause us to kind of get lost in the crowd and become a sheep, because it seeks to kind of merge with something greater and dissolve one's boundaries of individuality and personal identity. So very often with Neptune prominent, people are inclined towards escapist-like activities, drugs and alcohol, TV watching, perhaps, but not necessarily a more evolved expression might be through meditation, through arts and music. Religiousness, though, it's interesting because Jupiter very much kind of carries the energy of religiousness, so it might be more spirituality. So like the Jupiter energy might cause somebody to go to church, to where the Neptune energy might cause somebody to like go to the chapel when church isn't going on and say prayers for hours when nobody's looking. it's seeking that direct connection with God, or, whatever you may believe in.
It may be also associated with psychic awareness. I've heard Neptune described as all that we believe that we cannot experience with the five senses.
So what I would say is all three outer planets carry the potential to promote psychic abilities. So with Uranus, it may be in a more cerebral way, like getting downloads, like some sort of genius idea, of how to solve a problem or create an invention or something like that. With Neptune, it may be more like somebody who goes on a shamanic journey and meets a spirit guide or gets some information, in like a meditative dream state kind of thing, or is just very sensitive to subtle energy. So you're somebody who does energy work, who can really feel those subtleties, or perhaps even like the musician or the artist, who can really feel those like subtleties that, like, for the casual listener of the music, it's just like, wow, that feels really, like I really enjoy the music, but I can't tell you why. So that person is very sensitive to those subtleties, which would be outside of the scope of perception for most people. And then with that as well is that empathy. So the inclination to kind of take on somebody else's energy. So when you're around people who are very hostile, all of a sudden now you're feeling all agitated, or if people are depressed, now you're depressed. And so somebody who's like an energy worker or a therapist or, whatever it may be, they feel drained and all messed up because they're taking on their client's stuff and they got to bubble up and do some sort of clearing stuff, whatever it may be. And so that's very much part of the Neptune energy. And so, yes, people with prominent Neptune sometimes are, I would say the people that are very like psychic very often have prominent Neptune.
Okay, so next we're going to talk about Pluto, which I think, unfortunately, I know it's been downgraded to a dwarf planet, but it's still a planet in the birth chart, and it's very important. And it's really thought of as the planet of transformation and rebirth. And again, this is another generational planet. It takes 240 years to make a full circuit. So people don't have planetary Pluto returns. Countries may, but people don't actually have Pluto returns. Pluto wants us to transcend that which we know, redeem ourselves in the process, and come out stronger as a result. This planet is about transformation, regeneration, and rebirth. The house and sign placement of Pluto in your birth chart is about transformation and destroying anything that does not serve a higher purpose for soul growth. And I think it's interesting now, and again, we'll probably do a separate video on America's Pluto return, but since it takes 248 years, people don't have a Pluto return, but countries do. So interestingly enough, America is actually going through its Pluto return because I think this country is like 247 years now, 247 years old now. And again, I think we can all feel that there is this kind of transformation happening within the country. So I think that feeling of kind of things need to change, and it's not necessarily going to be a pleasant experience. And a lot of times when people have Pluto transits, it's not a pleasant experience. But so I think this is really one of the more important planets to talk about. But again, in kind of pop astrology and cookbook astrology, I think there's this idea that Pluto is no longer relevant because it's been downgraded to a dwarf planet. So I'm hoping you can really kind of dig into that more.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. There's a handful. So there's something like 19,000 plus identified bodies in our solar system, carrying various names, including dwarf planets, asteroids, centaurs, trans-Neptunian objects, and there might be a couple other classifications. As far as I know, there's only a handful of dwarf planets, which would include Ceres as well. And maybe a few others. So Pluto, for whatever reason, in astrology is as important as any other planet. And you can clearly see that when it's in transit or when it is making a significant aspect in somebody's birth chart, somebody's sun, moon, or ascendant. That energy is very potent. And one of the things I speculate about energetically with Pluto is it's actually a binary system. So it has a sister dwarf planet, Charon, and Charon orbits. They don't orbit around. One doesn't orbit around the other. Like a moon orbiting around a planet. They orbit around a central point in space. So it's almost like those two planets spinning around. It's creating some sort of more potent energy than the other dwarf planets. Another thing about Pluto is all the planets up that we've described up to this point are on a disk that's roughly, if you imagine the sun in the middle, all the planets are roughly within a fairly short range, like a dinner plate. And Pluto's orbit comes in like this, and it's a very eccentric orbit. So all the other planets also have a pretty circular orbit, to where Pluto's orbit is very elliptical. So it takes roughly 12 to 13 years to move through half of the signs in the zodiac, where then Taurus would be the furthest point. It takes 30 years to move through Taurus, and 20 something years to move through Aries and Gemini. So it's certainly an enigma. And so Pluto rules the sign of Scorpio. Everything I said about Scorpio in the 8th house would apply to Pluto. It would then be in detriment in Taurus, and it does not have signs of exaltation or fall yet agreed upon, because nobody's really been alive long enough to observe its effects. We can only kind of look into the past and read what's available in history literature, which I would agree is not enough to establish where it's exalted or not. So I agree with everything you said, Sarah, about Pluto. What I would add to that is Pluto will also has a large theme about power, as well as the dark side. So the house that Pluto shows up in your birth chart very often will indicate where there was some sort of a trauma, some sort of a deep wound, where a person has been subjected to some form of evil, or abuse. People who have Pluto, particularly like aspecting the sun, very often I've found are very ambitious. They value power and authority. And I don't really understand why that is. That's just something that I've noticed. Pluto carries this energy of intensifying whatever it is that it interacts with. So part of the nature of this energy is like Sarah, you talked about it, it will destroy that which no longer serves us. It will also destroy that which it finds to be untrue. So there's this this need for the truth. So people who have prominent Pluto, they typically don't like small talk, and they don't like it when people are not being authentic. They want somebody to like that person when they ask you how you're doing. Certainly in America, that doesn't mean tell me how you're actually doing. That means just say you're good. It's like saying hi. Somebody with prominent Pluto, when they ask you that, they may actually want to know. And if you're not okay, there's a good chance that they want to know. And they're totally comfortable being with you, regardless of how you're feeling. So it has this destructive nature because there's just something about it which it seeks to destroy so that a person can be reborn. And it really it values evolution, and perhaps part of the reason that it values that is it values truth and authenticity. And so part of that process of destroying is because people are very rarely authentic. People are very rarely living in a way that's true to themselves. They're living in a way that their society and their parents and whatever, or, they're scared that something bad's going to happen. They won't make enough money, whatever it may be. And so instead of just being true to themselves, they make a bunch of compromises and do what they have to do to fit in. And so the energy of Pluto is adverse to that. And it will create chaos and disruption. And typically when Pluto transit is happening, the other piece to Pluto and truth is it wants all to be revealed. So most people can't tell you why they do what they do. They can't tell you why they feel what they feel. This stuff arises from the depths of their unconscious. And it's the unconscious being defined as that they're unaware of what it is that's causing that. So Pluto causes that material to come to the surface. And when unconscious material is unearthed and circumstances arise that promote a person or give a person an opportunity to become aware of that, that is usually not a very pleasant experience. And a person will avoid it at all costs. So very often when a Pluto transit is happening, it will bring about some sort of very dark experience in a person's life. Like I could tell you when Pluto transited my son, that was kind of when my life took a very, like a turn towards the dark side. And that energy ran for, 4 or 5 years until I kind of started on this new path. And it was by the grace of a higher power where things changed and I kind of healed and let go of those old ways and kind of took a more positive path. So that is definitely kind of part of this like description of Pluto is, that we all have darkness within us and we tend to act like we don't, and we tend to pretend that other people don't. The reality is we all have it. It's in the collective. It's in our past, whether that be from our ancestors or past lives, or the collective, wherever else. And so people with Pluto prominent, or when you're receiving a Pluto transit, that it's difficult to hide that.